to introduce Phyllis. I met Phyllis, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago through her husband, which is not unusual for me, except this case, it was unusual because it was through the Big Book seminars. And my sponsor was dying, and I knew that I needed to get another sponsor. And so I was having a conversation with a dear friend of ours, a guy named Billy from Long Island. And I was in a quandary. I didn't know quite what to do. And he suggested Phyllis. And right away I said, that's a beautiful idea. She's as beautiful as my sponsor, Willie, inside and out. She's strong in recovery, focused and based in the Big Book. And those are things that were attractive to me. And even though she's been my sponsor for 10 years, I'm needing to put forth a greater effort to let her to get to know me more. So I'm committed to do that. So I'm just honored that Luann asked me to introduce her. And like I said, Suzanne and Marianne probably might even be better qualified than me, but I'm so appreciative, and you certainly have helped me immensely so far, as much as we've been in touch. So thank you. I'm done. Phyllis, it's on you.
Thank you, Bahia.
I'm Phyllis McCoy, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Phyllis.
I see a lot of old friends on here that been on my journey. What a journey, golly. I'm a member of the original West Side group in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I'm very proud of that. We've been a group for like 43 years. I was married to Joe, and I've met a lot of you through Joe. My sobriety date is June the 26th, 1976, and for that I'm very grateful. One day at a time. I'll tell you what I was like, what happened, and what I'm like now. It says on page 29 of this book, our members tell in their own way and from their own point of view how they have established a relationship with God as they understand Him. So I hope I can do that tonight. I grew up in a very, very small town. We lived on a farm, and my father was an oil field worker and a farmer, and we worked very, very hard on that farm. And they taught us a lot of good work ethics and taught us right from wrong. I was the oldest of 5 children. I was the only child for 6 years, and I just loved it. I had all those pretty dresses and bows and things, and then these other brothers and sisters started coming along, and I thought they were very unnecessary. And of course, I blamed my mother, wasn't I enough? How selfish and self-centered can you get at 6 years old? But I grew up and went to, high school and played basketball. We do all the things we do. And then at 14, I got a work permit and went to a little town, a bigger town, Bartlesville, and worked during the summer months. And at 17, I was down there working, and I fell in love. And this young man went into service, and my father begged me not to get married, but I did. And then I went to my father and I said, they transferred him to Augsburg, Germany. And I said, I want to go to Germany. He said, you really don't want to do that. And so anyway, I went to the travel agency, made my reservations and borrowed money from my father, and off I went. Went to New York City, got on a luxury liner called the SS United States, which dates me, and went to Le Havre and then into Germany. We were there for some time. We didn't have the money to travel or drink that good German beer because we didn't have the money. We were paying back my father. I came home, and at 19, my daughter was born, and at that point, I knew there was a creator. Now, I had not gone to church except maybe 2 or 3 times with my grandmother, but when she was born, she was just perfect. And later on, we get a divorce. Before we get a divorce, my father was involved in a car accident. And I prayed for the very first time that God would spare him and that he would live. I felt like he was the only one that ever understood me or was always for me. But anyway, he did die. And I thought, if that's the way God is, I want no part of him. And we were divorced, and I moved to the big city of Tulsa. I went to Brown's School of Business and took some accounting, got a job. My daughter was 3 years old, and my ex-husband remarried, married a young lady that had a daughter about the same age as Gail. And so he suggested that I start going out and doing things. They'd be glad to keep Gail, and it would be good for me. Well, I went to a loud, noisy neighborhood bar, and I started drinking. And all of a sudden, it was just like magic. The whole room changed. I changed. It had atmosphere. I had a great time. But I got very drunk. And that night, climbing up those stairs, I was so sick. But you know what I remembered the next morning? I remembered, even though I was hungover, I remembered that I had a great time because it took the pain away. And so I climbed down that merry-go-round of alcoholism. I had found a solution to my pain, and it made me feel part of life at last. It wasn't long before I was wanting to drink every night. My ex-husband suggested that, why don't you just let us keep Gail and you'll be free to go and come as you please. I did that, not knowing they were going to move to Oklahoma City. And when they did that, I had all this guilt, shame, and remorse of not being a mother and not doing the things I should be able to do. I ran around with a large group of people, and we drank and partied, and I had a good time. I was in full flight from reality. I married one of those guys, one of those victims, and we didn't change a thing. And one night we went to the bar, and he worked nights and he left, and we'd had a big argument. I've often said it was must have been New Year's Eve because it was a long weekend drunk, but it really wasn't. And one of the guys there at the table said, I said, if I had some wheels, I'd leave that guy. And he said, do you have $100? And I said, I can get $100. So he said, well, let's go get you a car. And I thought that sounded like a great idea, but it was not a good idea. But we went to another state, and we went to a parking lot where there was a lot of cars. And he switched the tag, and he wired this car up, and I get in it. And we start back, and then we stop, and his wife gets in the car with me to keep me awake. And it was beginning to mist rain, and it was freezing on the bridges, but I did not know that. And I crossed this bridge, and the car started fishtailing, and I started fighting with the wheel, and I got it straightened up, but I was on the wrong side of the road, and I ran smack into this pickup. And they told me this pickup burst into flames and went over this embankment, and this man was thrown clear. It momentarily knocked me out, and when I came to, the lady that was in the car was not there, and I was pinned in. The highway patrol come, and I thought, oh my God, what have I done? What have I done? And the next morning, my mother came, and I told her what I'd done, and she couldn't believe it. Well, I couldn't either. my husband had that car towed away during the night, and they never ever found out about that car, ever. And he had had about all of me he could stand, so he took me back to the farm. How revolting. But anyway, I'm back at the farm, and I finally talked this husband into coming after me and bringing me back home. And he did, and I all that time that I was there, I talked to myself about getting in trouble and drinking, and this stuff had got to stop. I had gone way too far. And I came back to Tulsa, and of course I had to do a deposition, and I was sued, and that makes you pretty nervous. Of course, I started drinking again. We were divorced. And one night I walked into the bar. I love the bars. And I walked into the bar, and down at the end of the corner, or the counter, was a guy like this. And of course, it was Joe. And somebody introduced us, and I said, gee, Joe, you look like my third husband. He said, my God, how many of you had? And I said, 2. So he kind of stayed away from me, but I'd make him speak to me. One night I closed up the bar, and I went out, and he was passed out in his car. And I knocked on the window, and I said, Joe, if you will, I'll drive you home. I'll have someone to follow me, and I'll drive you home. Well, that was the beginning. Then we started dating, and shortly after we were married. We didn't change a thing. We didn't go to the bar that night. We got married at a justice of peace, and Joe said, where's my receipt? And he said, she's standing right there. And nothing changed, we didn't do anything any different. We worked and went to the bar. And my daughter now is 11, and she's decided she wanted to come and live with us. And I was so excited. I said, Joe, now's a chance that I can be a mother, and we can be good parents and do what we're supposed to do. He said, yes, that's a good idea. We are drinking too much. So she come to live with us. And we may have cut down for a while, but we decided that we needed to get a place on the lake, and we could take her to the lake, and we'd have great weekends and good intentions. I'd go to the liquor store on Friday, and I'd get the liquor, and I'd go home, and I'd mix up this jug of ice water to pass back and forth, and we'd be half drunk by the time we got to the lake. And of course, that's the way we raised my daughter. She was 16, and she graduated and married at 17. She couldn't wait to get away from us, rightly so. Joe and I are rocking along, and of course, it's all his fault now. And for the first time, sometimes I go out of town and work, and my real security was my job, because it certainly wasn't a marriage. And we start not getting along, so we decided to split up Tulsa. He'd take 41st Street and west and north, and I'd take 41st Street east and south. Of course, occasionally we'd meet at home, and whoever got home first was the victim. And one night I got home first, and he came in, and I said something to him, and this is when it really starts getting good. He kicked that coffee table. We used to have those big old ashtrays, and I picked it up, and I was just consumed. I just felt it. I was just consumed with anger. And I picked that ashtray up, and I said, I'm going to cut your throat. I meant every word of it. But you see, he was in a swivel chair, and he would swivel around where I couldn't get to him. I finally just gave up. And booze was not doing what I'd always done for me. And I was angry, and I took it out on him. One night I closed up the bar. I closed up the bar, and I came in, and I slammed the door. He was playing chess. I wanted him to know I was home. And it made me so mad that he was having such a good time. I went in the bedroom, and I got a gun out, and I cocked it back, and then I didn't know what to do with it. So I just pulled the trigger and shot a big old hole in the wall. And he come running in there, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Joe, I'm going to kill you." Well, needless to say, his friends left right away. And that's the last time I ever seen the gun. And of course, divorce was on the way. We were divorced. That was in June of 1973. We had got married in 67. In November of 73, Joe called me and he said, "Could I come over and have a cup of coffee?" He said, "Phyllis, I found out that I'm an alcoholic and I'm going to Alcoholics Anonymous." And I thought to myself, I didn't say it to him, but I thought, "You're not an alcoholic, you just drink too much." But he came over. There he stood, fresh-skinned and glowing. Yes, Joe was my Ebby. I could tell he was different. I was so curious. He did that a couple of times. Then he said, "Hey, I'm going to a conference in Shreveport, Louisiana. Would you care to go?" Well, I didn't want to go, but I heard myself say yes. He picked me up with his sponsor and a couple of AA women. They didn't, Mary and Farrell, they didn't look like alcoholics to me. And we went to this meeting. That night, going through the lobby, there was a bar over there with the music and the laughter. And I thought, oh, I need a drink for this. But they're not drinking and I won't either. And we went to that meeting. My first spiritual experience, even though I didn't know it. I sat in that meeting. A lady was speaking by the name of Mary and M from Florida. I've never, ever heard of her since. But she started speaking and I started crying. Now, you couldn't make me cry. I'd become so cold and so hard-hearted. She made me cry. I started identifying with her. And I thought, I'm going to have to pay real attention or I'm going to end up just like her. I'm going to quit drinking on my lunch hour except on Friday. So we go back home and we start dating again. And we decided to go back together in June of 1974. And his sponsor, George, said, "Joe, that's not a good idea. You haven't been sober long enough. She's still drinking." He said, "It'll be okay. She's agreed to stay out of the bars and quit her job," which I did. But it didn't last very long. I got mad, and the first thing I did, was go to the bar. And of course, I blamed that on not working. I was restless, irritable, and discontent. And he said, "I've been thinking about the kids. I'm going to buy a Coney Island and for them to go to work, and you can just go out and get the money." And I said, that sounds like a winner to me. So he did that. And he'd come out on the evenings and help us work, and then he'd go on to a meeting. Well, my son-in-law didn't like that business, so that meant I had to work. I had to go to work, and I resented the tar out of it. I'd lock that door in the evening, and I'd start drinking. Of course, he was gone to a meeting. Now, I don't know how in the world he put up with me now that I think about it. I really don't. But he did, and then he decided to sell the business. And it's a lot of work trying to hide and lie, and as you know. And we sold the business, and he had the check in his pocket that night. And of course, we always went to the open speaker meeting on Saturday night. And we went to that meeting. Now, I had known for some time going to these open meetings and everything that I was an alcoholic, but I didn't want to be an alcoholic. I kept trying after time. I couldn't drink and I could not drink. But anyway, I wanted to talk to somebody so bad, but I knew if I did, they would know. Of course, they knew already, by looking at me, but I didn't know that. We went to a conference one time in Shreveport, and I talked to Alabama Carruthers about my drinking. I thought I can talk to her because she's from California and nobody will know. She said, honey, it's like being pregnant. You either are or you aren't. And she said, it's like an elevator too. You can get off on any floor. You can take it all the way to the bottom. Well, I didn't like anything she told me. So but I knew in my heart, I really did. And that evening they were giving away desired chips, or they were giving away chips. And I got up and got a desired chip. It was just like I was watching myself walk up there and get a desired chip. And I thought, my God, what have I done? And if Joe was telling this story, he would tell you I was just madder than hell because I had to check in my pocket and I was leaving in the morning. But he would also say, when you finally let go, God can work. And so that was the beginning of me coming into AA. That was April the 10th, 1976. We moved, and I knew we were moving from our neighborhood bar, and we moved. And one night I went to the furniture store to get some furniture. I'd been going about 11 weeks, I think, and I missed my old friends at the bar, so I decided I had some time, I'd run by and see them. I walked in that bar with no intention of drinking, but you see, she set me up a drink, and I had no defense. I had no defense against that drink, and I closed up the bar that night. And I went home. Of course, thank God Joe was asleep. But the next morning, I told him what I'd done. And he said, I'm not surprised at all. He said, you haven't done anything but sit in a chair since you've been here. And he said, you can sit in a chicken house from now on and it won't make you a chicken. I didn't have any answers. I didn't have any questions. I just knew that I was an alcoholic and that my life was unmanageable. I just somehow knew that that's the way it was. I didn't like it, but he said, if you want to stay sober, you're going to have to do what we've all done, and that's get a sponsor and work these steps. So I did get a sponsor, and I picked someone just as angry as me. But we made a beginning, and it wasn't long until she didn't come to meetings, and she had a slip, and she'd been sober a long time. And I thought, this thing may not work for me. If I had been raised like a Joe in a Christian home, it would be easier for me. But I got another sponsor, and she said, we're going to start from the very beginning. And I want you every morning to go in that bathroom and read that 24-hour book and ask God to help you stay sober. I wanted to drink so bad that my hair hurt, but I did what she did, so she said. And I went to meetings at noon, something we'd go every night to meetings. And I began to do the steps. And I believed that you believed, and maybe this thing would work for me if I did exactly what you told me to do. And I was willing. And I think we have to use, for me, willingness on every step. So I took an inventory, and the first one was probably guilty, guilt, shame, and remorse. But then when I got the real inventory, oh my goodness, I could see what I had become. Selfishness and self-centeredness indeed was the root of my problem. And I did so want to be different. I didn't like what I had become. I could not believe how selfish and self-centered I had been all my life. It was all about me. And it truly made me want to do 6 and 7, which is one of my favorites. I think I was around, Joe got really interested in Alcoholics Anonymous. He became a student of the Big Book, and he had met Joe McCwaney doing a film, Disease or Disgrace. And at that time, we were going to a group where in the Big Book, they had just taken a paragraph and put it on a 3x5 card. And we heard about the doctor's opinion. It made all the sense in the world to him. He was no longer a moral issue. He came back to the group that night and asked the group if they would consider. By this time, Joe and Charlie had made 40 CDs, or 4 tapes. And he said, would you consider listening to those CDs? And the vote was only by one did they agree to listen to the tapes. And the old timers boycotted the meeting. And we had people come in from all other groups to listen to these tapes. And so he decided right then and there that that was the only way to do, was to study the big book. So we started the group, Original West Side, in 1978. But I think I was about 6 years sober, between 5 and 6. And all of a sudden, everything was boring to me. I know you all have never probably experienced this, but Joe wasn't doing anything right. And I knew what everybody was going to say in my group before they said it. I was bored to hell. And I went to my sponsor and I told her, what's wrong? She said, well, sometimes when we pray, it just bounces off the wall. She said, you just keep on keeping on, and this too shall pass. Well, it didn't. It just kept getting worse and worse. So I called Charlie. And Joe took me to the lake, and Charlie and I sat down at the kitchen table, and I told him what I've told you. And he said, Phyllis, you're not working step 10. And I almost fell out of my chair because I wasn't. I want you to know, when you take the steps off of the wall, you'll get off the wall results. And I had somehow continued to take inventory, and when wrong, promptly admit it with, if I use restraint of tongue and pen, I won't have to make any amends. So I was stuffing everything. And he said, Phyllis, Charlie said, Phyllis, after step 9, he says, we've entered the world of the spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. This is not an overnight matter. You have to continue to look for selfishness and self-centeredness and all those things. And when they crop up at once, we have to talk to someone about it. If we need to make amends, we make amends. And he said, we continue on this growth of looking at ourselves and inventorying ourselves. He said, you're over here on this next page resting on your laurels. And the only way that you can rest on your laurels is going downhill, coasting downhill. And he made a believer out of me. And so I started very, very thoroughly. And I'm better today than I was then, but I've had a lot of practice. And in step 11, they used to tell me, God loves to hear from strangers. And he does. Communication is the beginning of all understanding. So I love step 11. I love all the steps, because as a result of these steps, I've had a spiritual awakening. It was really in step 5 when I was talking to my sponsor, when I knew that there was a God. It was like it says in the spiritual experience that, with few exceptions, our members find they have tapped an unsuspected inner resource, which they identify with a power greater than themselves. Our more religious members call it God consciousness. Well, I'm not a more religious member, but I do call it God consciousness. Thank God for that today. It's truly, truly an inside job, one day at a time. I don't know. We just went to a lot of conferences. I went to a lot of meetings. Occasionally I'd get to go with Joe and Charlie. And I met Tom and Barry and a lot of you on one of those trips. And it was just exciting. Our group was growing by leaps and bounds. I think after the first year that we had been meeting, we had 1 year birthdays, 16 in a row, 16 16 each month. And there was hardly anyone in Tulsa at that time studying the Big Book. And there, you would be hard pressed to find any group that doesn't study the Big Book today. And of course, that's where it's all at. It's been a journey and a half, and I've learned so much. Everything I've learned since I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous has been in Alcoholics Anonymous. I know today that the only problem I have is my thinking. You know, they say, turn your will and life over to the care of God as you understand Him, and our will is our thinking, and our life is our action. Oh my God, how true that is. The only problem I have today is my thinking. So I have the spiritual kit of tools and a program of action that I get up every morning and I get my coffee and I get my books and I do my reading, I do my prayers, I do my meditation. What a freedom that has given me from self. As you know, Joe and Charlie, for the next 16 years, they went out on Big Book studies, sometimes 2 or 3 times a month. And it was after Joe rotated out as delegate, I said, what are you going to do now, Joe? And he said, I don't know, but it'll be good. And that Monday evening, Charlie called him and said, let's do the Big Book study. And Joe was so honored and so thrilled. And that's when they started. But when Joe was gone so much, I too decided when I had gone with Joe to New York at the delegates meeting that service was important, that there's so big, Alcoholics Anonymous is so big and so powerful that I wanted to do my turn in service. So I too got involved in service and was the second. My sponsor was the first woman to be area chair and delegate, and I was the second to serve Oklahoma. And I was proud and full of gratitude for it. But one thing I found about service, whether it's making the coffee or serving your area, it brings out the very best in you. Giving of yourself brings out the very best in you. I haven't talked too much about working with others, but it's a big part of my life. When in 2014, we were on 2012, we were on a cruise. In 2006, we were on a cruise, and Joe got very, very ill. He lost his hearing that night, and I thought he had the flu. The next morning when we went to a hearing doctor, the doctor said, well, I can't do anything about the flu, but he can fly home. I had no idea he was so sick. Perhaps if we'd gone to the hospital in New York, the next thing wouldn't have happened, but we didn't, and we made it home, and the next morning he was very incoherent. So I took him to emergency, and he was in intensive care for 7 days. He had meningitis, and the doctor said he couldn't remember. He didn't. And the doctor said this will probably eventually return, but it's going to take some time. And it certainly did take time. But the thing I want you to know about Joe, he never missed a meeting, even though he couldn't hear and he couldn't remember. He did not miss a meeting. Eventually, the memory started coming back, and I didn't think there was anything wrong with it, but he decided that he could not do any more Big Book studies. So Charlie, I think, did it for the next year, and then he too retired. Later on, Joe was to get cancer, and he died Joe passed away in November of 2014. And I thought my whole world just fell apart. You know, as you all know, when someone passes, it's very difficult. And I thought there was an old song that was hello, loneliness, goodbye, love. I think I'm going to die. And I did think I was going to die. But I decided that I had to do something. So the next 13 weeks, I did something I don't believe I'm doing. I missed my home group and went to a grief class. And I was with people hurting just like me. And I highly recommend it because you do an inventory and you do work in there and you're with people just like you. And kind of like AA and the fellowship, you know. Anyway, I finished that and started back to my group, and there had been a lady come and I'd given her my phone number, and one day she called me. She was in treatment and she wanted to know if she could call me when she got out, and this was Patty. And I know God was doing for me, you see, what I couldn't do for myself. I needed Patty a lot more than she needed me at that point in my life. And we started through the book, and she will have 6 years in April. So God has always provided for me, even though there's times that, you know, I've wondered about it. My life is full and rich. I was looking at what I did last year. I went on a cruise, which I do usually every year. I went to Tacoma, Washington. I went to Arkansas to a conference. I go to 3 or 4 meetings a week. So then, you know what happened. And it was a stay at home. And I look at these other people that's traveling and that's going to meetings. And I thought, are they more spiritual than me? What's the deal? But then I remembered, God gave me brains to use. And at my age, I think I better use them. So you better keep your butt at home. So that was my decision. And it gives me more time to talk to the girls. Thank God for Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank God. It's given me everything I need, everything I want. I believe that God wants me to be happy, joyous, and free. And if it's to be, it's up to me. I do what I've always done, and I'm looking so forward to getting back out there and doing the same thing and going back to meetings. I had a date set for March 1, maybe after I had my second vaccination, but it'll happen when it happens, and I'll be back when I get to go back. One of the most wonderful things that's happened is my daughter, Gail. I knew she had a drinking problem because all the grandkids, I have 3 grandkids and 9 great grandkids. My grandkids kept telling me about Gail's drinking, but I never said anything to her, even though I did smell it a few times. She came to me last March and said she knew she had a problem and she wanted to do something about it. She needed some help. And I called a man I knew. She lives in Grove, and he gave me a woman's number, and I called her and asked her if Gail could call her, and she said yes. So Gail has 9 months sober now. She'll have 10 months this month, the 19th, and a lot of you have helped her. Marianne and Suzanne and Rick, you've helped her. She'd come down here in the beginning and go to our beginners meetings. We have a beginners meeting on Tuesday and Thursday. The only difference in our meetings today is they're only for 1 hour and not for 2. But thank God she found sobriety, and she's doing pretty well, I think, considering the lack of meetings and all that. But I've got so much to be grateful for. My journey has been, it's been unreal. It's hard to tell you all the exciting things that's happened and that God has done for me, what I could not do for myself. So I'm pleased that you invited me, and I'm glad that this is my first Zoom. I don't know that there'll be another one. Thank you for having me. Love y'all, and happy Valentine's Day, and tell your spouse you love him. Thank you.
Phyllis, thank you.
Thank you so much, Phyllis.
Outstanding.
About that.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Awesome. It's wonderful.
That was great, Phyllis.
So good, Phyllis.